Now, when we start to work with larger spreadsheets, or spreadsheets that contain much data that covers many rows and many columns, like this example here, well, we've got a considerable amount of information. We've got 300 rows of data regarding an employee and the hours that employee worked. Well, when you start to get down to a certain point, you can no longer tell what columns you're looking at because your headers are no longer visible on the screen. Okay, and this is a vertically oriented spreadsheet, but as soon as you scroll past the bottom of the page, as we're going back up right now, but as soon as you scroll past the bottom of the page, I lose the rows at the top. So I'm going to lose the contents of these columns, and when I get so far down, I may no longer know what I'm looking at in the columns. All right, we're going to show you a way to remedy that. Likewise, if you have a spreadsheet that goes far out to the right, when you scroll past the screen, you start to lose your columns. I'm going to lose column A and B and C and D as I go further out to the right. All right, there's a feature called Freeze Panes, which will enable you to keep the rows to the columns to the left or the rows at the top of your spreadsheet visible at all times, regardless of how far down or how far out you've scrolled. So what we're looking for is under the View menu or the View tab of the ribbon, you have the option over here called Freeze Panes. And looking at the options, when I click on that button, I have the option to freeze panes, and this will be based on my current selection or the active cell in the spreadsheet. I'll show you how that works here in a moment. You also have the options to freeze just the top row, and of course that would only work is if the very first row, row 1, contained the column headers that you wanted to keep at the top of your screen. You also have a choice to freeze the first column, which means column A. If column A had some important headings, and if your spreadsheet went very far out to the right, freezing the first column would keep that column in place. It would always be visible regardless of how far out to the right you scrolled. All right, now I'm going to click off that menu. I'm going to come back to it here in a moment. Now, what I want to freeze on my screen is I want to freeze everything above row number 3. So what I do is I click on row 3, I come back to my freeze panes, and I'm going to click on the first option, freeze panes, because what this will do is based on what I currently have active, the active cell, or in this case I have an active row, row 3, it will freeze and keep in place anything above what I've selected. I click on there. Now I'll see that I have a border line that extends beyond the edge of my data out over here. And as I scroll down in the spreadsheet, notice I'm already past the bottom of the page, but I still can tell as I get further down what the headings are and what each bit of data below corresponds to. All right, you see how that remains in place, those rows at the top, regardless of how far down I've scrolled? And go back up again. Okay. Now to unfreeze the panes and remove that freeze setting, come back again to this Freeze Panes button. Again, we're under the View tab of the ribbon. Under Freeze Panes, I now have the option to unfreeze panes, and I'm going to click there. Now, say for example, I wanted to freeze the column headings at the top, but also the row headings going down. I would then click cell B3 right here. And when I proceed to click on my freeze panes, it will freeze everything above the cell I've selected as well as the column or columns to the left. So with that cell B3 selected, I come over to freeze panes and I choose my freeze panes option right here. That then also put a vertical line going down, and if I scroll out to the right, I'll notice my column A remains in place. As far as I go, column A remains fixed on my screen. Likewise, if I scroll down, the headers still remain at the top of my screen also. So in this case, I froze both some rows as well as column A. To remove the freeze setting, come back to the icon again, click on Unfreeze Panes. Now, of course, you do have the option to freeze just the top row, which in our case it wouldn't work because the top row simply contains the heading of the spreadsheet. and that really doesn't give us a clue as to what exists in each of the columns. So we really need the first two rows here. So freeze top row will not work for us in this particular instance. Freeze first column, if I click there, that will click and lock column A in place, and as I go to the right, I don't lose what exists under column A. Right, so that's your freeze panes option, or options there under the View tab of the ribbon, and the freeze panes and the options you have.